Greg Byrne told Alabama players that he wants to find Saban's replacement in 72 hours. So we have to sort of ask this question to ourselves right now. Who could be next? I said it before and I'll say it again during this live show, man. Like, I don't think you put a timeline on yourself the way that Greg Byrne did if you don't feel like you're sitting on a winning hand in Tuscaloosa. And he mentioned in a statement, like, the ideal candidate for Alabama will be someone who's a strong recruiter, relationship builder, specializes in player development, and has the ability to lead this historic program forward at Alabama. Now, he spelled program with an A. I think that was a typo. I'm pretty sure he meant to say program, but regardless, I understand that press release was probably put out pretty quickly there. Now, again, here's my opinion on this whole thing. I don't know this to be true, but for Greg Byrne, one, the timeline thing points to him having a pretty good gauge for who he wants to go after. But on top of that, I said everyone was shocked by this because I think there was a fair amount of surprise. But to the exact same token, like, if you're Greg Byrne, with him working with Nick Saban for around 7 years, I think there was probably an anticipatory aspect of this to him. Like, if you're in a relationship with somebody, you understand the habits of your partner. You understand kind of the trends of your partner. Like, my wife knows when I'm getting hungry. Why? Because it's a sequence of events, and I haven't eaten all day. Nick Saban, 72 years old. It was a matter of time before he started to approach the idea of retirement. So if you're Greg Byrne, if you're good at your job, if you're good at working in tandem with somebody, you kind of keep an eye on what that next move could be. Great leaders are always a step ahead, and I think Greg Byrne is a great leader, and I think he was in some way, shape, or form at least keeping a side eye to what could be next to Alabama and what could be the next thing for them as it pertains to who could be the next head coach. So all I'm trying to say here is, I don't know that there was irons in the fire already or conversations being had, but I do think it was kind of a peripheral eye on what that next thing could be after Nick Saban, again, with him being 72 years old and all the success he's already had at Alabama. So when we talk about who could be next for Alabama as it pertains to their next head coach, I want to make sure we say this. Everyone is on the table. Everyone in the game of football is a prospect, I believe, to be the next head coach at Alabama. Why? Because it's, one, the greatest job in sports right now. I firmly believe that in terms of the greatest open job right now in sports. Anybody not named Jim Harbaugh or Kirby Smart, I think, is a prospect. And there's sort of this thought out there, and it's probably a bit of a hotter take, that, you know, do you really want to be the guy to follow Nick Saban? Do you really want to be the next one to follow the GOAT? And I hear the logic behind that, but at the exact same time, like, don't you want to be the next guy after Nick Saban? By nature of what he's left in Tuscaloosa, that's a roster made up of top 2 classes, a bunch of guys that have been with Nick Saban that understand an elite culture, and the resources at Alabama are second to none. The support at Alabama, I believe, are second to none. So would you rather take the job right now, or would you take the job in a couple of years if, you know, the guy after Nick Saban kind of, you know, didn't necessarily drive the car how you would have hoped he would drive the car if you're Greg Byrne, you take over a lesser Alabama and have to build it back up? The potential of Alabama will always be there by nature of that script day and by nature of Greg Byrne being good at his job. But again, I don't think Alabama will be in a more ready-made position to succeed if the next guy doesn't work out and you take the job after the guy who followed Nick Saban. So I understand the logic there, but I have a hard time getting on board with that. Now, the next name that I think we have to talk about, and I don't know how much traction this is going to have. Again, this is, I think, is very much so a wide open thing when it comes to who could be the next head coach at Bama. Steve Sarkisian, to me, makes a ton of sense. And he's been around Saban, was an OC for a national championship run. The reason why that's important, he understands the process. So if you're Greg Byrne and you want to hire someone that can kind of keep the culture and the character of Alabama sort of cruising where it's at, I think Steve Sarkisian has an understanding of how to do that. The development factor that he brings to the table as well. Also something Greg Byrne citing in what he wants in the next head coach. The development that Steve Sarkisian has had of his players at Texas, I think it speaks for itself. I mean, Xavier Worthy came in as a top recruit. He's going to leave and I think be a top 2-round draft pick, maybe a top 1-round draft pick. T'Vondre Sweat came to Texas as a 3-star recruit. He's also going to leave being a top draft pick this upcoming season. Adonai Mitchell was good at Georgia, really blossomed at Texas. So what I'm trying to say here is the development factor for Steve Sarkisian he has totally dismissed the narrative of Texas doesn't develop. That's no longer the case by nature of what Steve Sarkisian and his staff has done. Greg Byrne also cited the desire to have someone who is a great X's and O's guy. Steve Sarkisian is an artiste when it comes to what he does with the playbook. So that box is checked with flying colors. Dog of a recruiter as well. He's going to have more than likely 2 top 3 classes at Texas, and would bring that to Tuscaloosa, you'd have to imagine, when he gets to Alabama, if he's the next guy. Like, he would be a great recruiter as well. The question I think a lot of people have is the same one they had for Dan Lanning. Would you leave a place that's already up and running, that you've already done the legwork to get to being one of the best programs in college football? Texas has the resources too. Texas has the brand power too. My question here goes a little bit deeper for Steve Sarkisian, because he's spoken many times about how, hey, listen, there was a point in my career where I was down bad and I couldn't even get at interview places. And Saban brought me on and took me onto the staff. I wonder how much you can quantify that in terms of how much allegiance maybe he feels to be the next guy at Alabama. Now, again, that's purely speculation. I'm not speaking with authority, but the way that he talks about his admiration for Nick Saban and his gratitude for what he did for him at Alabama, I think it's an interesting thought. So, again, we'll see what happens there, but those 2 guys, I think, for me, are the top 2 that I would look at if I were an Alabama fan. Now, moving on forward here, talking about a head coaching vacancy in college football. I was talking with Josh Newberg this morning about this bombshell of a story we got right now when it comes to who could be the next guy at Alabama. And to me, and Josh agreed with this, head coaching vacancies in college football are a lot like murder mystery parties. And what I mean by that is, more often than not, the prime suspect that the plot suggests, the reports that are usually swirling around, hey, this guy's the right guy, he's the front runner, typically that's not the one who ends up getting the job. Now, that may not be the case with Alabama because of how big of a stick they are swinging with potentially, being able to hire the next head coach. But we find that more often than not, when it comes to hiring head coaches in college football, a lot of the times it's the butler. It's the name that was kind of 3rd and 4th on the hot board, or maybe not on the hot board at all, that ended up being the guy that ended up being the next head coach, or in the murder mystery metaphor, being the one who done it. So Mike Norvell is a name that ends up on the hot boards. The thing with him, no obvious Alabama tie. He's a program builder, though. Again, I say program with a U. Florida State was in shambles. He got them to be undefeated to win the ACC, and probably, for a lot of people's opinions, outside of the good folks in Alabama, probably had Florida State on the brink of making the college football playoff. Memphis took him to New Year's Six Bowl as a head coach there. Also worth noting, he has a $4 million buyout. Dan Lanning's buyout is $20 million. I'm not great with numbers, but $4 million is a lot less than $20 million. So take of that as you will. I also would say, who knows what's going on with the ACC? I don't think that the situation in their conference right now lends any favors to Florida State in terms of keeping a guy like Mike Norvell there. He's also on the cutting edge of college football, and that's something that I would really pay attention to if I'm an Alabama fan when it comes to assessing Mike Norvell. Look at the way that he's built Florida State back up. Yes, right now they're recruiting well, but it wasn't always that way. Mike Norvell and his staff killed it in the transfer portal. And we see the way that college football is starting to trend more and more towards a professional model. Free agency is pretty much the verbiage you can use when it comes to the transfer portal. Florida State, you can go down the list here and talk about top guys that got through the portal that made a significant impact for them and contributed to their undefeated season this past year. Keon Coleman, Johnny Wilson, Jaheim Bell, Fentrell Cypress, they have crushed it on the portal side of things. If you take that to Alabama, I would feel pretty encouraged as an Alabama fan, because you already know the brand in itself will recruit. You see Mike Norvell currently right now at Florida State recruiting, so it's not a question of can he recruit, but in terms of acquiring top talent, dude knocks it out of the park. Now, another name here that was on the hot boards for On3's very own Andy Staples and ESPN's Pete Thamel, Marcus Freeman, head coach of Notre Dame. I think he's interesting. Now, I have no idea if he wants to leave. Whenever you hear him talk about his program, he talks about Notre Dame and wanting to build a strong foundation there and do great things for years to come. The thing that's intriguing to me about Marcus Freeman, he's a long-term hire, 38 years old, similar to Dan Lanning. He has done more at Notre Dame with greater obstacles, because we understand this now. Notre Dame, it's a smart guy school. It is. There is high academic standards there, which makes it a little bit more difficult to recruit at the level of some other schools with lesser academic standards. Even with that being said, Notre Dame is set to do now 3 top 10 classes in a row under Marcus Freeman. All right, so he's been able to acquire top talent at a place where it's more difficult to acquire top talent than it is otherwise across the country. Also, this is the thing that's probably the most intriguing to me about Marcus Freeman. He is an envelope pusher. And what I mean by that is you think about Nick Saban, he's a guy who, never settles for, the silver medals of things in life. Like, he's always going after the very best. Marcus Freeman, I think, is cut from that exact same cloth. The way he's acquired quarterbacks via the portal, Sam Hartman and now Riley Leonard. The way they went and hired their OC this past year with Mike Denbrock from LSU. Like, he's a guy that just continues to strive for greatness. And he hasn't reached it just yet at Notre Dame. But I think if you're going to go ahead and buy stock in somebody, I think that Marcus Freeman stock is booming whether he goes to Alabama or not. That to me is intriguing. Now, here's the most out of left field hire. And this actually, fittingly enough, doesn't have a name on it. An NFL guy. Now, again, I have no idea who that would be. But you would have to imagine this will be attractive to coaches of all levels. And I think it would just take the right guy who probably wants to get to college, who wants to work with, the youth, if you will, but who understands the value of the Alabama job, who understands, hey, this is currently the best job in football available. This isn't coming around probably for a long time if Greg Byrne makes the hire he wants to make here. Just keep an eye on that. The pedigree there, I think, is interesting. I think it would take a personal fit, but I think the NFL is certainly intriguing when you look at who could be next at Alabama. So get at me on Twitter, get at me on Instagram, at JD Piquel. Let me know who you want to see as the next head coach in Tuscaloosa. Hey, y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also, be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.